It is July 20th, 1969, and man is about to land on the moon.
They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. And I just thought, wow, I've got to go there.
Before she died, the woman who wrote the code for Apollo 11 confessed what actually happened during the moon landing. And it's not what NASA told you. When the lunar module was 3 minutes from the surface, the guidance computer did something no machine had ever done in spaceflight. It seized control. It overrode the data stream. It made autonomous life or death decisions that no human could have made in time. And then it landed the spacecraft with 25 seconds of fuel left. NASA buried this in classified technical reports for decades, because what that computer did during those final minutes destroyed the single most important myth of the space program, that astronauts were in control. The engineer's name was Margaret Hamilton. She built the software that saved the crew. She watched it happen in real time. And what she revealed before her death wasn't just a close call. It was evidence that the agency deliberately hid the most terrifying discovery of the Apollo program. The moment machines proved they were better at keeping humans alive than humans were. The night the moon nearly killed them. 3 minutes before Eagle was supposed to touch the lunar surface, the mission started dying. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were locked inside a cabin barely larger than a closet, descending toward the Sea of Tranquility. Every instrument was live. Every system was running at capacity. The ground was rising fast. And then, the onboard computer started screaming. Alarm 1202, then 1201, then 1202 again.
It's at 1202.
1202.
The sound tore through the cabin and ripped through mission control like a blade. In Houston, Flight Director Gene Kranz watched 200 engineers go silent at the same time. Hands froze on consoles. Voices dropped to nothing. The room, a place specifically designed to manage chaos, became a tomb. Steve Bales, the 26-year-old guidance officer responsible for the computer systems, stared at his screen and felt his hands go cold. He knew exactly what those alarm codes meant. And he knew there was almost no time to act on that knowledge. Here's what NASA didn't explain to the public. These weren't routine warnings. These alarms were flagged during every training simulation as events that should never occur during a powered descent. Ever. They meant the guidance computer, the only system keeping the astronauts aligned with the surface, was drowning in data. It was being crushed under its own workload. And if it crashed, Armstrong and Aldrin would lose navigation, lose orientation, and lose any chance of landing safely, or getting home. Armstrong's heart rate climbed past 150 beats per minute. His voice stayed calm on the radio, but his body was betraying the truth. Aldrin read numbers off the display, calling out altitude and descent rate, trying to make sense of data that no longer made sense. On the ground, controllers scanned their screens with growing panic, trying to determine if the computer could hold together for just a few more minutes. And Gene Kranz had seconds, not minutes, not even a full minute, to make a decision that would define human history. Every controller in the room was looking at him. Every screen was flashing warnings. The clock was running out. Abort and admit failure in front of the entire world. A decade of work, billions of dollars, Kennedy's promise to the nation. All of it dead on live television while 600 million people watched. Or press on and gamble the lives of two men on a computer that was screaming for help. But here's the deal. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles from Houston and 250,000 miles from the moon, a woman named Margaret Hamilton was watching the same data stream across her screen. She was the lead software engineer who had built the Apollo guidance computer from scratch at MIT's Instrumentation Laboratory. She knew every line of its code. She knew its architecture, its limits, and its failure modes better than any person alive. And when she saw those alarms flash across the data feed, she later described what she felt in a single word: terror. This had never happened before, not in testing, not in simulation, not in any previous Apollo mission. These alarm codes were supposed to be theoretical, warnings for scenarios engineers believed would never actually occur during flight. And yet, here they were, firing repeatedly during the most important 3 minutes in spaceflight history. Hamilton knew immediately that something was feeding the computer more data than it could process, and she knew how close that put the crew to dying. If you've never heard this part of the Apollo story, hit subscribe, because what comes next is even wilder. The answer to why that computer was failing didn't start in Houston or on the moon. It started years earlier in a quiet lab at MIT, when a little girl pressed buttons she should never have touched, and accidentally revealed a fatal flaw that NASA refused to fix. The child who broke the moon mission. Years before Apollo 11, Margaret Hamilton brought her young daughter Lauren to the MIT instrumentation lab on a quiet evening. Engineers were running a routine simulation, testing how the guidance system would behave during a standard lunar flight sequence. To them, it was just another night of work. To a child, it looked like a spaceship cockpit. Lauren sat at the console. She was pretending to be an astronaut. She touched the keyboard and pressed a few keys without understanding what they controlled or what they could do. The system crashed instantly. Navigation data vanished. The simulated spacecraft lost its position, its trajectory, its orientation, everything that told it where it was and where it was going. On every screen in the room, the mission was gone. The virtual crew was stranded in space with no way to determine their location and no way home. Now, here's where it gets wild. The computer hadn't malfunctioned. It did exactly what it was told. Lauren had accidentally activated a pre-launch program called P01 during a simulated flight. The system followed its instructions perfectly. It erased all navigation data because that's what P01 was designed to do. The machine had no way of knowing the timing was catastrophically wrong. Some engineers in the room shrugged it off. Simulation. No real danger. Reset the system and move on. No spacecraft was at risk. No lives were in the balance. It was a child playing with buttons. Hamilton didn't shrug. She later said the realization hit her like a physical blow and refused to leave. If an astronaut, under stress, under pressure, in the chaos of a real emergency, pressed the wrong sequence at the wrong moment, the result wouldn't be a crash simulation. It would be a dead crew drifting through space with no guidance, no navigation, and no way back to Earth. She went to her managers the next morning. She explained in detail what had happened. She asked permission to add protective code, safeguards that could catch this specific kind of error before it killed someone, even if the person pressing the buttons didn't realize what they were doing. The answer was cold and immediate. No. The software was already too complex. Astronauts were trained professionals. They would never make that kind of mistake. Request denied. And get this, Hamilton didn't stop. She filed formal reports. She argued in meeting after meeting. She documented everything. And she was dismissed every single time. Then Apollo 8 launched in December 1968. And everything she warned about happened almost exactly as she predicted. While orbiting the moon, astronaut Jim Lovell made a mistake. He activated the P01 program during flight, exactly as Lauren had done in the simulation. Navigation data began corrupting. Confusion swept through mission control. Flight controllers scrambled to rebuild the spacecraft's position by hand, sending corrected data line by line back to the orbiting capsule. Apollo 8 survived, but barely, and only because the crew was in orbit, not attempting a landing. If the same error had occurred during a powered descent to the lunar surface, there would have been no time to fix anything. After that incident, no one at NASA dismissed Hamilton's warnings again. She was finally given full authorization to build the defensive system she'd been demanding for years. She added layers of protective logic, code that could detect human errors and catch them before they cascaded into catastrophe. Code that could interrupt astronauts mid-action if the system detected a dangerous command. Code that could force the computer to prioritize survival over blind obedience to whatever instructions it was receiving. This is the part they don't tell you. That decision, the one her managers nearly killed by saying no, the one they delayed for years because they trusted human training over software protection, would become the single reason. Apollo 11 didn't end in the worst disaster in the history of human exploration. And the way Hamilton's system actually worked was unlike anything that had ever existed inside a machine. The code that decided who lived and who died. In the 1960s, computers were dumb, rigid machines. They followed instructions in exact order, one task at a time. No flexibility, no judgment, no ability to adapt to changing conditions. And when something unexpected happened, anything at all that fell outside their program sequence. They stopped working, completely. No recovery, no fallback, no second chance. Failure was instant, total, and irreversible. Margaret Hamilton refused to accept that as the final word. She understood something most engineers at the time didn't want to hear. Spaceflight was chaos, wrapped in a thin shell of control. Astronauts would press wrong buttons. Sensors would send garbage data. Radar systems would flood the processor with information it didn't need. Systems would overload at the worst possible second. A computer that simply froze or gave up under pressure wasn't just a technical limitation. It was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Here's the catch. What she built next didn't even have a proper name yet. The concept barely existed in computer science. Hamilton designed software that could think about priority, that could evaluate, in real time, which tasks mattered most, and which ones could be sacrificed when processing power was running out. Her system could interrupt itself. It could recognize when it was overloaded, stop working on non-essential jobs, and throw every remaining resource at the core functions keeping the crew alive. Instead of crashing, it could shed weight and keep flying. But here's what made it truly radical, and what made people inside NASA deeply uncomfortable. Hamilton's software was built on a single, terrifying assumption. Humans will fail, not might fail. Will fail. The machine had to be ready for that certainty. It had to be prepared to override human input, ignore human commands, and make its own autonomous decisions about what mattered for survival when seconds counted more than authority or chain of command. Now think about what that means in 1969. Computers overriding astronauts, machines making life or death calls without asking for human approval first. This wasn't just unconventional engineering. It sounded like the plot of a horror film, not a specification document for the most important space mission in history. Many senior engineers at NASA resisted the idea outright. They believed human judgment should always have the final word. Hamilton argued that human judgment was exactly the problem. She fought for every line of that protective code against resistance from colleagues who thought she was overcomplicating the system. There's a famous photograph of her standing beside printed stacks of the Apollo guidance software that rise nearly as tall as her body. Every single page in those stacks was a decision about what mattered and what didn't. Every safeguard was a judgment call about life and death that she had to argue for, defend, and sometimes fight bitterly to include. And during those 3 final minutes above the lunar surface, with alarms screaming in the cabin, 2 men's lives suspended on a thread of code, and 600 million people watching on television without any idea how close it all was to falling apart. Every one of those judgments faced its ultimate test. What the computer did next is what NASA spent the next several decades trying very hard to bury. What NASA found and hid. When the 1202 alarms fired inside Eagle, Hamilton's software did exactly what she had designed it to do years earlier in that MIT lab. The root cause was almost absurdly simple. A rendezvous radar switch had been left in the wrong position. A small, mundane human error that was now flooding the guidance computer with a torrent of unnecessary radar, data at the worst possible moment in the entire mission. The system was being asked to process more information than it could physically handle while simultaneously trying to land a spacecraft on the moon. And get this, under normal circumstances, with the standard software architecture that existed before Hamilton rewrote the system, this kind of overload would have caused a total, unrecoverable system crash. Navigation data gone, guidance calculations frozen, landing impossible, abort mandatory. And even an abort would have been extraordinarily dangerous with a computer that could no longer reliably calculate the trajectory needed to get back to the command module orbiting above. But Hamilton's code did something no machine had ever done before in the history of spaceflight. It made a choice. Not a programmed response, not a pre-scripted sequence, a real-time, autonomous judgment call about what mattered and what didn't. Her priority system evaluated every single running, processed in milliseconds, faster than a human eye could blink. It identified which tasks were absolutely essential for landing, and it killed everything else. It dropped the low-priority radar processing. It shed every non-critical calculation. It preserved guidance. It preserved navigation. It preserved altitude tracking. It redirected every last scrap of computing power to the one set of functions that could bring Armstrong and Aldrin to the surface alive. The computer overrode its own standard programming to survive, and it did this faster than any human could react, faster than any controller in Houston could even finish reading the alarm codes on their screens, let alone formulate a response. Here's the deal. Steve Bales, the young guidance officer, recognized what the software was doing just in time. He understood that the computer wasn't failing. It was saving itself. He made the call to Gene Kranz across the control room. The computer is handling the overload. It's shedding tasks and protecting guidance. Kranz processed this in a heartbeat and gave the order that changed history. Continue descent. Eagle touched down on the Sea of Tranquility with less than 25 seconds of fuel remaining in the descent stage. 25 seconds between history and disaster. Now, here's where the story splits into two completely different versions. The public version, the one NASA gave to the press, described the landing as smooth, controlled, carefully planned. The alarms were mentioned but downplayed. Minor computer hiccups, handled without danger. But inside the agency, behind closed doors, the classified post-mission technical reviews told a completely different story. Gene Kranz and his flight control team documented in detail how close they had come. They knew the guidance computer had been seconds, literal seconds, from triggering an automatic abort sequence. They knew the system hadn't been operating within any comfortable safety margin. It had been fighting for survival, shedding processes, and clawing its way through an overload that should have been fatal. And they knew the mission succeeded for one single reason that no one at NASA was willing to say publicly. The computer made the critical decisions. Not Armstrong, not Aldrin, not mission control. The machine autonomously overrode the corrupted data stream that a human error had created. It chose on its own what to keep running and what to kill. It saved the entire mission by making decisions faster and more accurately than any human being could have made them. This is the part they don't tell you. This was what Hamilton later described as NASA's real discovery on the moon. Not geological samples, not photographs, not the footprint. The discovery was that human-controlled spaceflight, the entire foundational concept of the program, was already obsolete. The machine had proven it was better at the job during the moment that mattered most. And NASA buried this. Reality, because the entire space program, its funding, its public support, its Cold War propaganda value, all of it was built on the carefully constructed myth of the astronaut hero, calm, commanding, in total control. Apollo 11 proved that myth was already dead. So the story was cleaned up. The alarms were softened into footnotes. Hamilton's name didn't appear in a single major headline. And the most important revelation in the history of space exploration was filed away in technical documents that almost no one outside the agency would ever read. The confession. For decades, Margaret Hamilton kept the full weight of what she knew largely out of public view. She continued working on software systems. She continued thinking about failure, but she didn't go to the press. She didn't write a tell-all. She let NASA's polished version of events stand unchallenged year after year. But as the decades passed and the Cold War pressures faded, she began saying openly what the agency never would. And she was blunt, devastatingly blunt, about one thing above all else. The software didn't assist the astronauts during those final 3 minutes above the moon. It didn't help them. It didn't support their decisions. It saved them from themselves. This is the part they really don't want you to know. Hamilton once said in an interview, "The thing I worried about most once I took over the manned mission was, what if there was an emergency that came up? That single fear," she explained, drove every design decision she ever made about the Apollo guidance software. Every line of defensive code, every priority protocol, every safeguard she had to fight her managers to include. She didn't design the system for success. She designed it for failure. She assumed the absolute worst would happen and built software that could survive it. She explained her core approach in terms that still carry enormous weight decades later. "I realized I could come up with a solution. Have our software interrupt the astronaut displays and replace them with priority displays." Think about what that means. Her code was designed to override the crew, to seize control of their screens, to force the machine to show only what mattered for immediate survival and suppress everything else, whether the astronauts wanted that or not. Whether NASA leadership was comfortable with it or not. And that is exactly what happened during the most critical 180 seconds of Apollo 11. The system she built, the one her managers tried to block for years, the one that was born from a child pressing keys she shouldn't have touched in a quiet MIT lab, took autonomous control at the most dangerous moment in the history of human exploration. It made decisions that no astronaut could have made in time. It overrode the consequences of human error, and it landed the spacecraft. Hamilton's confession, when it finally came in full, wasn't about claiming credit or seeking glory. It was a warning. What Apollo 11 proved, and what NASA deliberately buried in technical files for decades, is that the moment you put human beings inside truly complex systems, the greatest threat to survival isn't the environment outside the spacecraft. It's the humans inside it. And the only thing standing between life and catastrophe is software built by someone who had the courage to assume that everything, absolutely everything, would go wrong. Every system you depend on today runs on this principle. Every aircraft autopilot, every hospital patient monitor, every autonomous vehicle navigating a highway, every algorithm managing power grids and financial markets and nuclear plant safety systems. All of it traces back to principles that Margaret Hamilton fought to establish at a time when the people in charge told her she was wrong, told her she was overreacting, and told her that trained professionals would never make the kind of mistakes she was trying to protect against. They were wrong. She was right, and the proof is sitting right in front of you. You know Neil Armstrong's name today because Margaret Hamilton's code brought him home alive. So here's the question. NASA never wanted anyone to ask. If the Apollo guidance computer hadn't overridden human error on July 20th, 1969, if those two astronauts had died on live television in front of 600 million people, would we have ever gone back to the moon? Would the space program have survived? Or would humanity have looked up at the lunar surface and seen nothing but a graveyard? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story shocked you, hit like and subscribe, because the next video goes even deeper into what NASA kept hidden during the Apollo program. Click the cards on screen now. See you in the next one.